Welcome, students. Today we're going to learn how to set up a basic acrylic painting. You'll need a few items. Make sure you have water handy, newspaper. You should have a plate for mixing. You will need a largish flat brush and a round brush, and a single hue, a bit of black, and a bit of white paint. Also, it's nice to have a palette knife for scooping out your paint. You'll use the newspaper to clean your palette knife off and also to wipe your brushes off. And we'll just get started. Okay, so the first thing you need to have is called a tinted ground. To do this, you will take a small amount of a hue. So I'm using blue for this, red, yellow, green, anything will work. So just a small amount of a hue, and I'm wiping my palette knife off on the newspaper. Next up, I want to take the larger flat brush and the water, and I'm going to put some water on the plate next to the hue. The goal is to have a really thin coat of a color of paint underneath the painting. This is called a tinted ground. So this is very thin, runny paint, and you're just going to paint it across the whole picture. You shouldn't be concerned about it being too neat and careful, because most of this is getting covered up. The purpose of the tinted ground is to make sure that you don't have little bits of white board showing through when you're finished. It adds some interest to your picture to have a color that sort of appears through the other layers of paint occasionally. Okay, so the next step, and you can see mine's really messy here. The next step is to sketch, and we're going to just do a basic ball shape. To do the sketch, I want to switch from the flat brush to the round brush. Using a large round brush allows me to just use the tip of the brush for small areas, but it still holds a lot of paint, so I can really move around quickly. The sketch, we're also using thinned down watered paint, so I'm going to dip my brush in the water, grab just a bit more acrylic paint, not too much though. It should still be quite thin. And then I'm just going to sketch a basic ball shape. Also, I'll sketch the outside edge of the cast shadow. And the edge between my direct and my indirect light. The purpose of sketching is to just lay out the big areas. You should not be doing any detail with this. You just want to know where you're going to place things. Use thin paint, so if you change your mind about the location of something later, you're not really committed to having that line, because if it's thick paint, it might show through your painting. If you want to make changes, if you make a mistake, just dip your brush in the water, and if the sketch line is still wet, you can just brush over it and get rid of it somewhat. The third step in setting up our painting is called underpainting. Now with underpainting, we just want to lay out the basic light and dark areas of the picture. We're simplifying the values between just light and just dark. That helps us to visualize where we're placing our lights and darks. So to do this, I'm going to use a small amount of black paint and a small amount of white paint, and I don't need very much. I'll start with the white. I'm just going to scoop a tiny bit out onto the palette, clean the knife off on the newspaper, and just a tiny bit of black. You need very little paint for this. This layer should be thin. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to my bigger brush, because this is going to go a lot faster. So, and it's been sitting in my water, so I want to dry it off a bit so it's not too wet. I'm going to grab some water here, and I'm just going to grab some of that black paint. It also should be very thinned down. And I'm blocking in the shadow side of the ball with a thin layer of black paint. I'm going to also block out my cast shadow area. Clean the brush off. in the water, add some water to the white. So this should be really thin, watered down white paint. And I'm going to block in the light side of the ball. This just creates a roadmap for my painting. I can kind of visualize where the lights and darks are going. I'm not putting in a lot of detail. I just want to see where I want to lay things out. And there you go. Tinted ground, sketch, underpainting, all thin paint.